Okay, good evening and thank you for joining our Durham Catholic Parent Involvement Committee for tonight's online forum. My name's Melissa Bevan. I'm the chair of DCPIC, and I'd like to introduce our Durham Catholic Parent Involvement Committee executive team of Rose Lepresti, Vice Chair, and Aaron Grout, Secretary. I'd like to begin this evening with a prayer for the safe and healthy return of our families and staff to schools. Please join me in praying Hail Mary. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for our sinners, now and the hour of our death. Amen. All saints, pray for us. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. As we begin this evening, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that we here in the Durham Catholic District School Board are on the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island. I hope everyone has had some time to relax and reconnect with nature, family, or friends over the summer. As a parent, I know this has been a difficult time and lots of information about the return to school keeps changing. But I want to thank all the parents and guardians who sent us questions in advance of tonight's forum. We received nearly 280 emails with questions regarding the return to school. It's our goal this evening to answer as many questions as possible. If we don't get to all your questions, then please visit the Return to Learning webpage at www.dcdsb.ca. This page is the best source of the latest updates, documents, questions, and answers. We are also recording this evening's forum for any families who are not available to view tonight's forum, and we'll post this recording on the Return to Learning webpage. It's now my pleasure to introduce the members of the board's senior administrative team. I'm going to start off with our Director of Education, Tracy Burrell. We have the Superintendent of Education and the Director's Designate for our DCPIC, Jim Wilson. We have the Superintendent of Facilities, Scott Greaves. We have Superintendents of Education, Mariah O'Reilly, Gerard Wynn, Susie Lee Fernandez, and Mike O'Neill. We have the Superintendent of Business Services and Chief Financial Officer, Ryan Putnam. And we also have our Chief Information Technology Officer, sorry for the mouthful, Ronald Rodriguez. Tonight's agenda includes a presentation by Director Burrell and the Superintendents of Education, who will briefly speak to their specific areas of expertise. This will be followed by questions we've received from parents and guardians in advance of tonight's forum. I now call on Director Burrell to lead us through tonight's presentation. Director Burrell.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much to you, Melissa, and our Durham Catholic Parent Involvement Committee for giving us this opportunity to work with you to connect in another way with our parents. I can only kind of echo your sentiments that we know that parents are quite anxious to receive as much information as possible regarding the return to learning, and that this is a time when everyone is seeking to know what things are going to look like. And so while we are working through this and we don't have all the answers immediately, we will do our best to go through some of the things that we do know for certain and respond to as many questions as we can, as you said. And so I do have members of our senior administrative team here today that I will kind of jump to at various points, and then I know that there's questions that you've got for us when we get to the end of this presentation. And so as we begin here this evening, here in Durham Catholic, we have a specific mission. We are called to celebrate and nurture the God-given talents of each student as we serve with excellence in the light of Christ. I put that up front in just about every presentation that we do because I think that in times of stress and strain and challenge, it can be very easy to lose sight of the reason that we exist and the bigger purpose behind what we do. And so as a team in senior admin and then working with our principals and all of our staff members, we always try to call ourselves back to that essential mission of celebrating and nurturing each of our students. And so we'll go through some slides now, and as I said, then we'll be able to get to those questions. Hopefully, a lot of the questions that people have will be answered through some of the presentation that we do. So I know, as I said, that this has been a time where parents have been perhaps frustrated on occasion, not knowing what's going to be happening for their children, having to wait for announcements to be made, getting partial pieces of information, having to make decisions, not knowing everything about what you are deciding. I fully understand and can appreciate the anxiety that causes. And I would like to extend my thanks to all the members of our parent community and our broader Catholic community for your ongoing patience and the way that you have supported us as we have worked our way through these very difficult organizational nightmares and trying to figure things out. I can tell you that we have been working continuously since I would say since mid-June and earlier, thinking about this return to school. We have had some guiding principles that we have used to help us to work through these times, and these are the things that you see on the screen right now. So essentially, of course, first and foremost, we have been trying to prioritize the safety and well-being of students and staff. We hear it loudly and clearly, and we share the concern that our students and our staff, and by extension their families, all be safe or as safe as possible under these circumstances. We also want to promote our unique Catholic identity. I did speak about that in reference to our mission statement. And I would say that something that I feel that we have that helps us is an abiding sense of hope. We recognize that prayer is not the answer to anything, but certainly through prayer and through our faith, we can call upon God and our belief system to calm our anxieties. So it won't protect us from all things, but at all times, but it will hopefully give us a sense of being centered and knowing that together we will be able to work through things. In terms of trauma-informed approach, so one of the things that we've talked to our staffs about for quite some time now, right back when we were doing online learning in March and right through to June, was the whole notion of trauma-informed pedagogy. We recognize that as a whole community, our province and our country, going through a pandemic can be a trauma-inducing experience, and that's notwithstanding individual traumas that may be occurring during that time through illness, through people being separated from those they love, and so on. And so as we return to more face-to-face learning or more continuous learning through online, we also want to make sure that we are being very mindful that we have to look after people's well-being as we move into that learning. There's a saying, Maslow's before Bloom's. Maslow is a framework that talks about the hierarchy of needs that people have, so the need to be fed and cared for and housed. And Bloom's is a hierarchy of learning. And one of the things that we know as teachers and as educators is that we actually have to look after people's basic needs before we can expect them to be able to learn at any sort of higher level. And so one of our goals as we return will be to be very mindful of that and helping people, our students especially, and to be developing a sense of safety before and as we move into starting to engage in that learning process in a more formalized way again. We want to obviously reestablish relationships with students and families, because one of the biggest pieces about responding to anyone with trauma is making sure that we're grounded in relationship. We tried to maintain relationships to the best of our abilities during the time when we were closed and working remotely, but we are looking forward to the opportunity to reconnect in different ways with our students and families. It has been a long time and we miss you. We also want to provide all of our students with robust learning opportunities. You'll note that that comes down around the fourth thing. It's not that it's not important, but obviously there's things that we need to put in place in order to be able to get there. And along that line, we want to ensure equity of outcomes for our students. In order to do both of those things, we have to be prepared to be flexible and equitable. I say all of that because I get lots of questions. We have literally received hundreds of emails, maybe thousands, between myself and our communications department and our senior administrative team and our principals and vice principals. And sometimes people say, well, you know, why didn't you do this model, or why haven't you used that model, and so on. And so I would like to just briefly indicate that there has been quite a bit of complexity to the decision-making process that has gone on over these last several weeks and several months. Right in the center there, you'll see Durham Catholic District School Board, but I would remind our parents that in our Catholic School Board, like all other boards across the province, we are governed by the Board of Trustees. They are responsible for setting policy and procedure within the context of the Education Act. And other laws. I, as the Director of Education, along with my senior administrative team, are responsible for carrying out operations of the board, and we do that in conjunction with the wonderful talent, skills, and leadership of our principals, our vice principals, and our managers. Also within all organizations of any size, you have to have a joint occupational health and safety committee. And, you know, in these types of times, joint occupational health and safety is extremely important. And so we are consulting with them as well. And we've had meetings with our joint occupational health and safety committee as we have been establishing our return to work and return to school plans. In the figure that you see, or the diagram that you see on the screen there, you can get a sense of all the different people and organizations that we've had to consult with and take direction from in order to be able to come up with the plans that we've had. This has had to have been a very collaborative exercise, and I would say that there's been a lot of challenges to that collaboration because, of course, most of us were all working remotely until recently, and so you know, we have a number of different ministries that we're coordinating with, but I have specifically highlighted those blue arrows between ourselves, Durham Catholic District School Board, our transportation, DSTS, and Durham District School Board, because that relationship is a very important one. Durham Catholic and Durham Public share transportation through Durham Student Transportation Services. Our routing for all of our busing is combined and coordinated together. And so as we entered into the development of plans in order to be able to return to school, we had to make sure that we were aligned with one another because our transportation depended upon our models being the same and working through that. So that's taken a lot of conversation. I won't go any more in depth on here, but if there's questions, I might come back here to just again reference all of the different organizations, ministries, groups, etc., that we have to try to comply with in order to be able to come to the decisions that we're coming to right now. So in terms of health and safety and operational considerations, I know that those things are first and foremost on everyone's minds, and it's certainly something that we have been working very hard to understand and to put into place the things that we can in order to be able to increase the safety of all of our students and staff as we go back to school. There are some critical things that we have had to consider in doing this. One of the directions from the Ministry of Education in the Return to Learning Plan is that we have to be very mindful of the number of direct and indirect contacts that students have. And so in elementary, we have been, it has been mandated that we must limit, make every effort to limit our direct and indirect contacts for students to 50, and in secondary to approximately 100, and that's in any given week. Those numbers don't necessarily include their contacts, incidental contacts or short-term contacts on bus or at childcare. Those are instructional contacts that happen during the course of the school day. And so practices that we would have had in the past. For example, many of you who have children in elementary might be familiar with a Reading Buddies program, or other programs that bring classes that are older together with classes that are younger, and so on, and kids coming together. We will not be able to do those types of programs in the year ahead, at least under these current circumstances, because we need to keep that cohort, which is in elementary, that's the class, kind of isolated from other classes, and limit those students' contacts. Some people have asked us why we're only doing one subject in the face-to-face sections on any given day. That again has to do with the limiting of contacts. When we were looking at the matrix that would be involved in having students, say, take some face-to-face instruction for period 1 and period 2, our contacts would exceed 100, and therefore it was not a viable option. I want to go on to, I'm going to touch on in this presentation some of the big items that people talk about, but I would like to say up front, and I will reiterate it later, in terms of maintaining the safety of our students and staff, what our goal is to minimize risk. We are under no illusion that in any way we would be able to eliminate risk, but we are trying to minimize risk. And in doing so, we are looking at a whole layered approach. There is no one single thing that is going to be the silver bullet, so to speak, of keeping everyone safe. It's actually a combination of things that, when put together, we feel will provide a variety of layers of protection for our students and staff. Although I don't have a slide about that up here, the first layer of protection is working in conjunction with our families to make sure that parents are closely monitoring the health of their children and never sending a child to school if they are showing any sort of symptoms of COVID or if they are unwell. Staff will also ask to be mindful of that and to complete a self-assessment before they ever enter the building. And we will be limiting visitors to any of our schools, and no visitors will be allowed into the building without confirming that they have done that self-assessment and are free and clear of COVID symptoms or contact with people who have had COVID or traveled. So going on to masks. Masks has been a huge topic of conversation since the beginning of the pandemic. Our mandate moving forward is in line with the ministry's direction, and that means that students from kindergarten to grade 3 are not required, but we are strongly encouraging our students from kindergarten to grade 3 to wear masks, to bring masks, but they will not be required for them. Students from grades 4 to 12 are required to wear a non-medical or cloth mask. And students and families will be asked to bring those to school. Just like with all other things in school, if anyone is in a situation of need or is finding that challenging, we would ask you to confidentially contact the school, who will be able to help you out with that. But for the most part, we are asking, just like when other times we ask you to bring indoor shoes, that students bring their masks to school with them. One of the things that we note, and any of you that everybody's been wearing masks all over, but we do note that it's difficult to wear a mask all day, and it's not even necessarily healthy to wear masks all day. So we will be looking to build in breaks during the school day where students and staff can physically distance from one another and have periods of time where they can remove their masks for a little bit of breather. So that, for example, we're going to try to encourage staff to bring kids outdoors more often, and that's a great time to have a mask break. We are expecting direction from the ministry with regards to other types of face coverings, and when we get that, we will post that information for our families. In terms of our staff is also required to wear PPE. PPE stands for personal protective equipment. All staff, unlike students, staff will be required to wear a level 1 medical mask that will be provided for them. They also will be provided with a face shield, and where necessary, they will be provided with other types of personal protective equipment, such as gowns and so on. The thing that I want to emphasize about personal protective equipment is that personal protective equipment is a layer of protection that is put into place when physical distancing can't be maintained. And so physical distancing is our first level of protection. So we're always going to try to make sure that we are able to physical distance as much as possible, but where that can't be enacted, then we will have this personal protective equipment as a second layer of protection. In terms of that physical distancing, just put some samples up here of some of the signage and some of the decals and so on that have already been ordered and are being put up throughout our schools to remind our children and visitors to our school about directions, which ways they are supposed to be traveling when they are in the school, how far 2 meters apart is. Those ones are actually real size so that the kids can see that. Where they are to stand and so on. I would say to our parents, one of the things that you can do to help your children to transition back to school is when you are out in public with them, any time that you can point out these kinds of signage that you will see in a variety of different public areas, grocery stores and the like, it would be good, especially with your younger children, to point that out and have them practice looking for that kind of information around them that will, again, help them to know that in school it's the same. These are additional signs that just are samples of things that we have produced and that we will be putting up in appropriate parts of the school. One of those signs there you see is hand washing. So hand hygiene will be a very important part of our return to school plan. We will be working with our students to talk about and learn about hand hygiene. We will be making sure that we've got hand washing breaks into the school day, and that we are teaching children to make sure that they are sanitizing or washing their hands before and after use of any sort of common equipment. I am going to now give my voice a rest, and I'm going to ask our superintendent, Scott Grieve, who is our facilities superintendent, if he could speak to the next couple of slides.
Thank you, Director Burrell, and good evening, everyone. I should enter my video off. I'm down and quite low in power here. But I just want to speak to enhanced cleaning. First off, the current practices within our schools, shared responsibility by all people within the building. And as we move into our COVID reopening, there's the emphasis being on screening, physical distancing, hand sanitizing, and where we're wearing PPE. That'll help reduce the risk that's been outlined by public health. But we're going to emphasize that twice daily is a minimum for disinfecting the high touch points, and that'll be completed by our custodial staff. There'll be additional disinfecting of touch points during the day as needed in areas like washrooms or stairwells or main doors. And the staff during the day will be covering that. And in the evening, we'll have staff going through the classrooms and hitting all the chairs and desks and major touch points. We are hiring an additional group of floater custodial staff to assist with the extra cleaning, and looking to have about 4 extra hours on average per school when we're fully staffed. We're also, we've undertaken an exercise with our custodians and our union in order to look at the specific cleaning of what tasks that they were currently doing and what tasks they're going to have to be focusing on, which is those, the priority being the high disinfection of touch points. And then there's areas where they may have done on a weekly or monthly basis that may not have that as high a priority because we want to disinfect. We're also looking at buying some additional equipment, electrostatic sprayers that'll help with the quick disinfection during the day in areas where maybe there's presumed or confirmed cases of COVID that we can use to go into those rooms and sort of use the machine, and it'll cover off on our disinfectant. Then if you go to the next slide, we're going to talk about air handling and ventilation. So wherever we can open windows, we're encouraging them to be opened. They should be open at the beginning and the end of the day by the teacher or the staff in that room. Where it's safe and possible, our heating and ventilation systems, the settings will be adjusted to increase the amount of fresh air, generally 2 hours before occupied and 2 hours after, and where we can, we'll run them longer than that. We're also looking to either increase our filters or filter changes, currently 3 times per year to 4 times per year, and where we can, we're looking at a MERV efficiency improvement. Not all the systems allow us to increase the MERV efficiency, but we're trying to identify those units that we can actually increase that on. And then obviously, wherever we have ventilation issues, we've asked our custodial staff who input those work orders to make sure those are prioritized, so our maintenance staff can quickly respond to those and get the ventilation issues dealt with as a highest priority. Thank you, Director Merle.
Thank you, Superintendent Grieve. So we're going to move from here into some overview of some of the school programming issues. So one of the things that we would like to do is thank all of our parents and guardians who did complete the survey that we sent out to you. I understand again and can sympathize that you didn't necessarily have all of the information that you wished to have at that time, but unfortunately we were very much in need of the numbers that you provided to us in order to be able to actually answer some of the questions that you had. At this point in time, as of August 24th, we had a total responsiveness of 21,291. Our survey did close on August 12th. At that time, we had about 2,500 people who had not responded, and we spent several days with a team of people trying to reach out to those individuals to confirm their choices, so that we could continue on with our staffing and timetabling and try to be prepared for the fall. At this point, as of August 24th, you can see our numbers there that we had about a little over 17,000 students that have chosen or are indicating that they are returning to class, and we have a little over 4,000 that are looking for that online option, with some of those responses still pending. If there is anyone on this evening that has not confirmed one way or another with your child's school, I would implore you to do so first thing tomorrow, as that information is very important to us. In terms of switching from online to in-class learning, in fact, we had set the date of August 12th as the time to close that survey. This was something that was supported by, and in fact, even directed by the ministry. We do realize that, as I said, we're still trying to close the loop with some people on this, but the reason that information is required is because we actually have to determine the number of students to expect in each school in order to be able to set our class sizes, and also the number of students to expect in online, so that we can set up those schools, elementary and secondary virtual schools, and make sure that they are staffed as well. And so we are approaching the start of school very rapidly. I can tell you that under normal circumstances, our staffing procedures in school boards usually start around the end of February, beginning of March, and it is always a bit of a strain to try to get us properly staffed for September. You can imagine that to try to fit all of that in and change all of it between August 12th and September 8th is a Herculean task. And so one of the things that we communicated when we sent out the survey is that once people choose, we really need you to kind of commit to that. I have had many parents ask me, well, what if I want to change? We certainly, respect your desire to be able to change, but one of the things that we need to be clear upon is that while we will endeavor where possible to accommodate changes that are requested, we cannot guarantee that we will be able to do those quickly if the numbers do not permit. And so in some cases, we may have to wait until a natural break in the school year in order to be able to accommodate that. In our secondary schools, we're going to be looking at a quadmestering system, and so for students to to start in one program and move to the other will not be simple, because they will be covering quite a lot of the curriculum in a short period of time. And before you get too far into the school year, you're already going to have missed significant parts of the program if you try to switch. So I'm going to ask Superintendent O'Reilly now to speak to some of the components of our elementary and class learning.
Thank you, Director Brill. Good evening, everyone. So we know that the ministry directed that we would have a return in elementary to a full day of school, which was such an exciting announcement. Students will return to school and receive the full day of instruction, the 300 minutes. They will attend every day for the full day. And receive the full implementation of the Ontario curriculum. Where adjustments and modifications will be made, they're around keeping around health and safety measures. And they will also have regular delivery of the French and arts programs. So as the French teacher would go in, or the arts teacher, the drama teacher, they may go into the classroom. And so that their day will be, they will return to quite a normal day for students, which will be wonderful for their well-being.
I think that we could probably safely say right now, we have heard from DSTS as they have gotten through a certain portion of the routing. And at this point in time, I think that we will likely, for our elementary schools, be able to stick to all of our regular bell times in all of our elementary schools. Our secondary schools, we may be looking at some changes there, but I think that we will be good with bell times in our elementaries.
So this is a typical day in an elementary class model with a school that, for example, starts at 8 and ends at 3. So as I said, I've reviewed some of those points, but another important point is that classes will be cohorted together and they will stay with one teacher where possible, but specialized teacher like the French teacher, as I said, or someone delivering perhaps a phys ed or an arts period would be entering the classroom. And to facilitate a really safe and healthy entry back to school, we have a plan to staggered entry, so that this will. We've looked at other countries, other research around what has made successful restarts of school, and staggered entry was one of the key features that helped ensure that school got off to a positive and safe start. And so staggered entry will, week 1, a quarter of the students will attend on the Tuesday the 8th. On the Wednesday, a different 1/4 will attend, and so on with Thursday and Friday. So that means students will attend for 1 day that week. And then the next week, they will come twice and in half the classes. And so by Friday, September 18th, that will be the first day that everyone is in the school together. So this will allow us time to really have strong, clear orientation for students, to review things like social distancing, mask protocols, hand washing, new routines around going to the washroom, signage in the hallway, as well as really giving an opportunity to welcome students back and make sure they feel safe, but also that they're feeling like they're belonging in a community and that we can really attend to their well-being.
With regards to the staggered entry, you'll see that it says for elementary classes only. That refers specifically to this schedule. We are still reviewing our operational needs in our virtual learning school and our secondary school. We are working overtime, a day and night, to try to make sure that we're ready to start up as soon as possible. But within the next day or two, we will let you know if we have to make any adjustments to the first day of school for those 2 other programs.
In students in grades 7 to 12 schools, the students in grades 7 and 8 will follow the elementary model that I just described. And the students in grade 9 to 12 will return on a quadmester model. So grade 7 and 8s in Parima and in Senior Parima, as well as All Saints, they will return full days once we have after our staggered entry 5 days a week. And I'll explain the secondary model next. Our secondary model as we return is a quadmester model in which students work for 45 days and receive 2 credits. They have 150 minutes in person of instruction and then 150 minutes online. We have been designated by the Ministry of we have been called by the Ministry of Education a designated board, and which means that we have an adapted school startup for our secondary students, and students attend alternate days in order to keep the cohorts to 15 students to ensure that we have a safe and healthy start. The ministry will advise us as to when we can go back to a full model, which will still look like 150 minutes in person and 150 minutes of online, but students will attend every day. So just to recap, our secondary students will attend every other day. They will have 150 minutes of in-class instruction, and then they will return home and have 150 minutes of online instruction. 1 week, courses will be alternated 1 week about. So if, for example, if English was my child's first course, they would be doing their English course for 1 week face-to-face, and perhaps their math is their second course, and that would be in the virtual way it would be delivered, and then the next week it would switch, and their math would be in the face-to-face, and their English would be virtually delivered.
One thing that I'd like to note on this particular model here is it does say 90 minutes for lunch. That is on the outside. We want to make sure that we provide enough time at the lunch period to safely transport students home and have them ready to come online for their synchronous learning in the afternoon. But that could be anywhere from 60 to 90 minutes, depending upon the school and the routing that has to take place.
Thank you. And as Director Brill said, we worked very carefully to have our model approved. It was approved a week ago today, I believe, or by the Ministry of Education. And so from there, we have, as Tracy said, been working overtime to operationalize this model. So in school learning, there will be some changes that are in relation to health and safety. For example, field trips. At this time, field trips will not be permitted. We will look to limit the sharing of equipment where possible, but we will also really heavily rely on hand hygiene so that when toys or equipment are being shared, students wash their hands before sharing, wash their hands after using the equipment. Assignments, especially for secondary, as often is the case now, are handed in online, and teachers will practice hand hygiene around also these sorts of things. We know that the transmission on paper and of COVID-19 does not really occur very often that way, but of course we'll still make sure that we are practicing our very safe hand hygiene. Recesses and breaks, lunch, may be, depending on the size of the school, may be a little bit different. They may be staggered, the times may be a bit different, but for the most part, you know that your children will be going back to still experiencing lots of time, recesses outside, lots of time for lunch. They will be eating in their classroom to stay cohorted with their same group. And when they're out at recess, they'll be playing with the students in their same class cohort. Extracurricular activities will not begin just yet. We're going to get things up and running, but we know these are extremely valuable to students. So when the time is right, we will look to start those up again. As far as, some subjects like music, visual arts, and physical education, they take a little more thought around adapting them for the delivery with the health and safety measures that we want to take. But at the same time, we know that they're such an integral and valuable part of students' education. We know that many students have been missing the opportunity for the physical movement, as well as, to dabble in the arts. And so we really will have the modifications needed to ensure. So, for example, things like choirs will not happen at schools yet until we're given more direction by public health. And we will really be encouraging phys ed classes, especially in this nice weather, to occur outside. Outdoor learning will be a really wonderful opportunity for students to get outside and to have a little break from their masks. And we think about secondary, same thing applies. When we look at the subjects that we need to consider, music, again, vocal performances to begin with, we will be looking at doing those more online. We will be taking more direction from public health just to make sure that we are moving in the most cautious but effective way. Computer studies, physical education, science, those are all really relying on those layers of protection that Director Brill has talked about around physical distancing, around hand hygiene. Obviously everything really also relies on the importance that you've screened your children before they've attended school, and that we know that students who have arrived at school arrived there healthy.
Thank you, Superintendent O'Reilly. I believe Superintendent Wynne is on there, and I wondered if you'd like to speak to the assessments for this year.
Thank you, Director Burrell, and good evening, parents and guardians. As a parent, you might be wondering, what does it look like in terms of literacy tests and EQAO and assessments as they unravel this year? So the information we've received thus far is that if your child is going into grade 3, grade 6, they will not be writing the EQAO assessments this year. However, you have a child in grade 9. The latest information we have, and this is posted on the EQAO website, is that if your child's in grade 9 taking math semester 1, they may be writing the EQAO during that window opportunity, January 22nd. And so usually at each of the individual high schools, they usually designate 2 to 3 days for that EQAO math assessment. And likewise, typically if your child is taking the math course while they're in grade 9 semester 2, then the window would be from June 3rd to June 16th. And once again, secondary schools have the discretion to pinpoint which days they would designate for the assessment. So once again, things may unravel in the fall, but that's the information we have if your child's going into grade 9. As well, in terms of the literacy test, the information we've received so far is that the assessment will take place on April 8th, 2021. So if your child's going into grade 10, they can anticipate that. And we'll certainly reach out to, schools will reach out to families and students in grade 10 to let them know if anything changes. If you do have a child that happens to be looking at graduating, quad 1, quad 2, and they haven't met the requirement, they should talk to guidance and look at requesting adjudication, or perhaps enrolling in a literacy course for quadmester 1 or quadmester 2.
So we're going to move on now to online elementary and secondary. One of the things I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Wynne to talk about now. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. So this information is more for if there are any parents, guardians listening and they have registered for our Catholic virtual schools. So we are opening an elementary one and we're opening a secondary one. And so right now, as previously mentioned, we're looking at the staffing component across the system. So what parents should expect is the principals are going to endeavor to group students. If you have a child in grade 3, they're going to try to group them with other grade 3s from their home school as much as possible. But what they can expect is there will be other grade 3s from other students across the system, which is also a great opportunity to network and meet new friends. And as well for a secondary, we'll be timetabling and looking at staffing that as well too. So there will be A lot of staffing changes. It's important to note that they will have different teachers across the system as well, and once again, different principals, and I'll get to that slide as well. And some of the things to expect is they will have the full curriculum, but of course, there will be adaptations to suit an online learning environment. So there's some subjects that lend themselves a little more nicely to the online learning environment, and then there'll be tweaks where teachers will make make accommodations to suit it for the online learning environment. And as well, there will be a requirement to participate synchronously every day, and I'll get to the number of minutes eventually. And I just want to stress as well, we will continue to build virtual communities across our system with an emphasis on outreach to church and chaplains and prayer and that faith formation. And on the next slide is our highlights our two administrators. So Mr. Michael Young will be the principal of our Durham Catholic Elementary Virtual School, and Miss Sonia Malem will be the principal of our Catholic Secondary one. And we are in the process, we just last evening and today, of appointing vice principals to those schools as well. And another thing, some parents might be wondering about is in terms of what platforms their child will be utilizing when they participate in synchronous learning, online learning in the Catholic virtual schools. So the two I'd like to hone in on are for that synchronous component, that live interaction with other students and the engagement with teachers is Zoom and Microsoft Teams. So those are the two platforms, and once classes are established and teachers have been selected for each of them, teachers will be reaching out to parents and to students and to talk about that. But that's something you can start to familiarizing yourself or with working with your child in the meanwhile. As well, many of you will be familiar with EDSP, and that's our communication tool to keep parents informed of assignments or things coming up, report cards. So we will continue to use that to make sure you're informed of anything going on. And then the ministry just released PPM 164 recently, about a week or two ago, and so we're still unpacking that, but something that may be of interest to you is the synchronous component that the ministry has outlined in that. So for instance, if your child is in year 1, year 2, the expectation is that there would be 180 minutes of synchronous learning. And likewise, if your child's in secondary, likely looking at 225 minutes if they're registered in 2 courses. And then of course it outlines for primary and intermediate accordingly. So as a parent, you might be wondering, what does that look like if my child's in perhaps primary? So here's a very, a draft sample timetable of what it could look like. And keeping in mind every class, every teacher, it will be very different. So once again, endeavoring to cover the full curriculum to make sure there's language, there's math, there's religion, social studies, there's opportunities for nutrition breaks and lunch and things like that. But it could be divided up into different chunks. It could be, it might look like 100 minutes in the morning, maybe more in the afternoon, vice versa. But that just gives you some idea. So there will be breaks throughout the day. And if you have concerns, once again, about the schedule and things like that, as always, if your child's coming back to school in class or online, always reach out to the teacher, talk to the teacher, and once those classes are established, we're going to be asking them to reach out to you and to get to know you better and to share those concerns and how we can help support you. And we want to be flexible throughout this process as well too. And on the next slide is once again just a very sample secondary online learning schedule as well. So for instance, we are doing a quadmester. So typically students would be registered in 4 courses for 1 semester, 4 for 2nd semester. However, with the quadmester, they will hone in and focus on 2 courses in particular until about approximately mid-November, and then they will shift and they will focus on another 2 courses until the end of January, and likewise. And so if a student, for instance, maybe is registered in English and Canadian history, they might have history all day in the morning, block 1, block 2, synchronous learning, and then in the afternoon have that synchronous component, block 3, and then the block 4 will be more for academic support asynchronous. So if they want to have some check-ins, maybe an email, ask a question, teachers can be available. But the synchronous component will probably look more like that with block 1, block 2, block 3, and it's still a work in progress, and teachers will finalize that as they reach out to your children once timetables are finalized. And something to keep in mind as well too, in terms of the schedule, as a parent, you might be wondering, will it just be the teacher talking, or what will that look like? So there'll be a combination of activities and different teaching strategies based on the different divisions. So for instance, there might be a large group discussion, there could be small group discussions, there could be gallery walks, might break it up with nutrition breaks and some physical activity. And there's times for students, so at the secondary panel where the teacher may be supervising in block 2, and students are co-creating and working on something and doing some critical analysis and working on an assignment together jointly in a document, and reaching out to the teacher synchronously, and different breakout rooms while the teacher's supporting that.
Thank you, Superintendent Wynne. As we work towards the start of school, I would advise parents who have their children signed up for online learning that we are working to get our communication lines up and running in there in terms of email lists and websites, etc. And so more information will be coming from Principal Young and Principal Mellum once we are able to get those things functioning, and we are looking forward to that. So the last set of slides, or the last couple of things that we would just like to touch upon here before we get into those questions, is just about our students with special education needs. Each of our students is unique in what they bring to school. Some of our students have more individualized needs, or more complex individualized needs that we endeavor to meet. And so some of our students who are working in non-credit bearing courses at the secondary level, and those students that are specifically supported with one-to-one assistance, we wanted to let the parents know that we are making arrangements to accommodate the attendance of those students on a daily basis. This is in order to be able to do that, we had to seek an exemption from the Ministry of Education to provide for those students. And so, and that was one of the things that we were directed by the ministry, is to really consider the needs of our students who, because of their individual who they are as individuals, they require that those constant touch points. And so we have done that. So it is our expectation that students in those courses will be attending daily. This is secondary. All, of course, in elementary, because we're in a conventional return, all of our students are returning every day. But in secondary, our students, some of our students will be in those courses that are coming every day. The schools will be contacting families directly to discuss those details. We'd also like to highlight a number of students in our board have individualized education plans. We will be endeavoring to follow all of the processes that we normally would follow for IEPs in the creation of the IEPs and the review of the IEPs in the fall. However, we do want to remind parents that we are going to be limiting visitors to the school. So in some cases, we may be seeking to hold some of those meetings virtually as opposed to in person. In terms of, we have resource and itinerant staff who work like for hearing services and vision services. They will continue to meet with all of their students and continue to support their students. And I would like to draw any parents who have students with particular special needs on our special education page, and it's linked in the Return to Learning page. You will find an extensive amount of information about our programs and services and how we will be proceeding with those in the fall. With regards to assessments, some of our children and some of our families, some of our children were perhaps pre-scheduled prior to school closures for assessments, or perhaps they had some assessments that were completed. Our goal in September will be to complete the feedback meetings on any of those unfinished assessments, and we are going to be having our student services staff available immediately for consultations and support within their schools. And then we will continue with referrals for assessment based on individual student profiles and gaps and so on. So our student services supports will continue to be in place, and we will be continuing to do everything that we can to support our students with special needs. So that brings us to the end of all of our slides. I know that there was a lot there, but I also understand, Chair Bevan, that you had many, many questions that were submitted to you. So it is our hope that through going through a lot of these slides that we may have touched on a lot of the questions that people had, but I do understand that you have some more questions for us at this time.
Thank you, Director Burrell, for tonight's presentation, along with this senior admin team that popped in and out for their specific expertise. So what I'm going to do is I'll jump to some of the questions that we got from emails that we received prior to the parent forum. One of the questions was, I know it was touched on a little bit in the presentation, but I think we wanted to get clarification because I know everyone's seeing in the news all the other different school boards who have submitted their plans, and the Minister of Education has either told them no or revised it. So we just want confirmation that this full plan that you presented tonight was approved and that there's no other modifications or tweaks aside from the planning process of what you've presented that needs to continue.
Yes, thank you for that, Chair Bevan. Yes, what I would like to say is, in terms of approval of the ministry, the specific thing that the ministry was seeking to approve was any schedules that were connected to an adapted learning model. So for us, as all elementary schools across the province, we're in a conventional return there. So nothing in elementary is affected by or requires any sort of ministry approval. It's a regular day. Kids are returning on other than the staggered start. Kids are returning on a regular kind of school basis with all of those layers of protection that we talked about. The approval process that you read about in the paper and so on, that really has to do more with the secondary scheduling. And yes, we have received approval of our secondary schedule. I do want to, again, extend my thanks to parents and individuals for their patience. We had some models that we were looking at. We chose not to post a variety of different models that we didn't have approval for until we had approval, because we didn't want to confuse people by that. But we received our approval last week, as Superintendent O'Reilly had indicated. So what that approval is for the quad mestering system, alternate day model, and the hours of online versus in-class scheduling that we shared tonight.
Thank you for that, Director Burrell. Our next question is, returning to school expands every family's social circle or their bubble exponentially. Can you please explain how you feel this is safe for everybody coming back to school?
Thank you for that. I am going to kind of switch over here for a minute. So I first and foremost would like to indicate that as the Director of Education, I am not a medical expert, or I do not have medical qualifications. And so as such, I, along with my colleagues across the province, we have to rely upon the medical community. So the Chief Medical Officer of Ontario, the experts at Sick Kids and a variety of other organizations who provide recommendations for us, etc. And so, and of course, the Ministry of Education who guides us. One of the things, so although I'm not a medical professional, I have done an awful lot of reading and reviewing of materials around this because I do feel a personal sense of responsibility around trying to make our schools as safe as possible. So something that I would highlight is that my understanding at this point in time is that all return to school options and the things that we are doing will always be guided by the current state of affairs in the province and in the region with regards to COVID transmission. And so I just pulled this off just before our forum started this evening. I do want to remind people, I know, and I've said this before, it's very easy to really be frightened by what we hear on TV every day. I know you can't turn on the TV really, or the radio, or look on social media for more than a couple of minutes without having something about COVID come up. But what we are looking at specifically in Durham region is that right now, our current numbers, we are in a fairly good place in Durham region. So if you look at the number of reported cases and the number of reported deaths, like I see these stats going up to August 24th. So there was only 2 reported cases in Durham on August 24th. You'll see that currently, and this is the most current data, as I said, I pulled it off about an hour ago. I understand that there's only 1 hospitalized individual on an ECU and that there's 19 cases in all of Durham region, and that includes long-term care facilities, retirement homes. So when we look at those numbers in Durham region, our numbers are telling a good story right now. Those numbers could change. And if those numbers do change, I know that we will be working with the Public Health Department in Durham region, and of course continuing to follow the advice of the medical health officer. And our model might have to change. We might have to adapt or pivot from conventional return for elementary kids to an adapted return or to a fully online return. So I say that up front. I also want to tell you that in terms of looking at trying to keep students safe, one of the major sources of information that we rely heavily on is this document from Sick Kids Hospital, but it was not just created by Sick Kids Hospital, but it is the guidance for school reopening. In our board's strategic plan, we are committed to excellence, which means that we are trying to learn about and use current research-based best practice. At the moment, this document is the document that we have to rely upon in terms of looking at what medical professionals are telling us. I do know, because I follow social media as well, that there's some people who are perhaps speaking out or questioning the validity of the advice that is found in this document. I look at it and I can respect that everybody's nervous, but one of the things that I note in here is all of these organizations, CHIO, Holland Bloorview, Kids Rehabilitation Hospital, Kingston Health Science Center, Children's Hospital, London Health Science, et cetera, that all contributed and collaborated on this particular document. So I do feel that it has been fairly well researched, and if you read through it specifically, you'll see that they highlight where there was not consensus and where there was, and so on. And so I say all of that because I want to be clear that I, as director, am not going to ever say that we are going to be able to eliminate all risk for our students and staff. It would be irresponsible of me to say so. I am going to tell you that we are going to do everything humanly possible to mitigate that risk, following all of the medical advice that has been given to us and working diligently with our staff and our school communities to try to reduce risk. All of that being said, one of the primary reasons for opening schools is not just about economic recovery, but it's also about keeping children safe. And this, I guess, is what is very compelling for me as a director of education. When these medical professionals looked at the overall state of health of our children across the province, there are some things that are extremely concerning for us. During this period of closure, and even though it was entirely necessary in our province, our children have had other risks that have been presented to them, whether it be through risks from other pre-existing conditions, mental health concerns, depression, mood changes, etc. All of those have increased for our students en masse across the province. And so that in and of itself, when you look at the balance of the risk around COVID transmission, we know that for children that the risk, especially young children, seems to be much lower than adults and older children. So when you look at that balance, I think it's important for our children to be able to get back to school. And so going back to your question, I know that that was a long-winded answer. Is it going to increase their bubble? Absolutely, it's going to increase their bubble. But we are going to work on this hierarchy of controls and looking at all of these layers of safety to try to mitigate that.
Thank you.
Can you please provide detailed protocols in the elementary sector on how snacks lunches will be handled, along with lunchtime supervisors, shared washrooms, shared supplies, recess and arrival and dismissal times?
Thank you. And so with regards to that question, I'm glad that I am on this slide, and I'm actually going to go back to this one. So this is a difficult question for me to answer with specifics, because every single one of our school buildings and the physical building, the number of students, etc., is slightly different. So what we have done in Durham Catholic is we have been looking at this hierarchy of controls. We have been educating our principals and vice principals and our joint occupational health and safety members about all of these layers of protection that have to be put in place. Every school principal, we met with every school principal last week. They have been working on an individualized plan to look at all of those areas that you talked about, so how each of those things will be handled within their school in accordance with or aligning with all of these layers of protection. And each one of them was given a template that included all of those things that they had to complete with their staff members, looking at their own building and so on. Later this week, our supervisory officers are meeting with each one of those principals to review their plan, along with a member of our joint occupational health and safety committee, from top to bottom, to see what they're doing in their specific schools, to provide resource to them on any areas that they're still struggling with, etc. On a very general sense, for example, around shared washrooms, we will be looking at scheduled washroom breaks, as well as frequent cleaning that our superintendent facilities services has already talked about, maximum numbers of people that would be able to be in that space at that time. And again, like that whole hand hygiene, washing your hands before and after being really stressed. So that would be an example. Now, I can't say, what is the maximum number of kids that will be allowed in any washroom in the school, because it's going to depend upon the size of the washroom, the age of the children, how many kids are in the building, etc. And so that's where the individual schools will get specific with their own plans.
Thank you, Director Burrell. The next question is in regards to the enhanced cleaning protocol. Can you please go into a little bit more detail of what that entails? I know it's mentioned in the presentation that it's twice a day or as needed, but can we speak a little bit more about the frequency? And the other option, and the other part of it was, will there be a mechanism for reporting if it's not being followed within a school?
So for that response, I'm going to actually ask Superintendent Grieve to speak to that for us.
Thank you, Director Burrell. So I spoke briefly earlier on about the enhanced cleaning protocols, and obviously current cleanliness practices of the school are a shared responsibility by all people within the building. And the additional emphasis that we spoke about regarding screening, physical distancing, hand sanitizing, masks, and PPE wearing is going to help reduce the risks associated with COVID, as outlined by public health. Our minimum level of twice daily disinfecting of high touch points will be completed by the custodial staff, and then additional disinfecting of touch points will be completed as needed in the areas like washrooms, stairwells, main doors. This will be enhanced by our additional custodians we'll be bringing in to actually complete some of that additional disinfecting. And our current practice is that the custodial staff record their daily cleaning procedures in an electronic logbook, and this practice will continue going forward, and they'll be identifying the areas that they've disinfected. And should there be any concerns about this not being done, as would normally occur, it would be reported to their supervisor, and then through that process with their supervisor and the custodian and the school, they would look at, they would deal with each situation as it came up. So that's kind of how that loop would get closed in terms of reporting it back.
Thank you, Superintendent Grieve. Please bear with me, Director Burrell. This is a little convoluted, this question, but we thought it was really important to talk about it. Could you explain in detail what the protocols are should a student or teacher show symptoms in class and then subsequently receive a positive test result? Further to that, how will this be communicated to the whole school community, especially if there are siblings in other classrooms? And then further to that, again, to follow up, what does the school or the school board require from that individual in order to return to in-class teaching or learning?
Thank you for that question. And so a couple of things that I will say about that. One of the things that the Ministry of Education has done and the province has done is they have indicated that they will be hiring 500 additional public health nurses in the province of Ontario. And so an additional support that we will have in helping us to respond to any sort of symptoms or outbreaks in our school will be those public health nurses that will be connected to our schools. In the meantime, we already have a very close relationship with Durham Public Health with Regina there, and she works with us on a regular basis. With regards to the whole protocol for an outbreak, this is one area that actually will be provincially mandated. So there is a protocol that is under development with the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Health across the province right now. I've seen some drafts of that protocol, and I understand from the ministry that we should expect to have the final version of that this week. I can tell you in general terms, some of the highlights of that protocol. So every school will be required to have a designated area where any individual who is showing symptoms of COVID could be isolated. So if a student or a staff member is getting sick, we also will have a COVID kit on hand at the school that will include gloves and masks, etc., for anyone that's interacting with the individual. Of course, especially for our little ones, we will be looking after them and comforting them. However, we will make sure that anybody who is in contact with them will be properly gowned and masked and so on. We'll be keeping them in an isolated place, isolated from people who are not properly in proper PPE, personal protective equipment. We will contact their parents and we will contact the public health department. And so again, the details of that protocol are yet to be released from the ministry. However, the other piece that I want you to know is that school boards will not be the ones making those contacts. We are responsible for tracking who everyone in the school has been in contact with on a regular basis. But once we make that contact to the public health department in terms of direction around who needs to be contacted, who needs to stay home, who needs to be tested, all of those kinds of things, we will be taking our direction from medical professionals around that through the health department. And again, as soon as we get that finalized provincial protocol, we will make sure that that is provided in an update on our Return to Learning website.
Thank you, Director Burrell. Our next question is with respect to, was it ever considered to have the high schools go completely online so that the elementaries could then utilize that space to reduce class sizes and to better ensure that we keep that 2 meter distance?
So I'm just going to jump back here for a second to these screens here. So was it ever considered? So at the beginning of the summer, actually around June 19th, we were instructed as boards of education by the Ministry of Education that we needed to plan for 3 possible options, either a fully online option for students, an adapted model, which would be a hybrid, partially in school, partially online, or a full conventional return. And so we spent the better part of the first 3 to 4 weeks of July looking at all of those plans. You'll see on the left side of the screen there, the Council of Directors, the English Catholic Council of Directors, there was a GTA networking group, Elected Provincial, the Ontario Catholic Trustees Association, etc. These were all other organizations, along with all of our affiliates, that we were communicating with and brainstorming with and trying to come up with all the possible models that could be used. And so we went down several paths and kind of looked under every rock and nook and cranny as to the various things that could be done. At the end of the day, when the ministry was the one that directed us at the beginning of August, so on July 30th, that we would be doing a conventional return to school for all of our elementary schools and a hybrid for all of our secondary schools. In our board particularly, we are a designated board, so we are an adapted model. And so, in short, we considered all kinds of things, but then we also had to make sure that our models aligned with the requirements of the Ministry of Education.
Thank you, Director Burrell. Our next question, what is your plan to ensure that social distancing will be enforced, and how will desks be arranged / spaced since class sizes have not decreased in the elementary model?
I guess this is a place where I would like to express my thanks, respect, and regard for our Board of Trustees. Those of you who had opportunity to perhaps listen to our most recent special board meetings will know that after having apprised our trustees of our current situation and so on, we also received their approval to utilize all means available to us, including our reserves, in order to be able to try to decrease class sizes in our schools and really ensure that safe return. And so, in short, at this point in time, we are looking at our entire system. This is one of the reasons why we are so busy right now. Having received all of the information that we got back through the survey, we're now having to restructure, remodel classes, etc. We believe, so it is our goal right now to keep all of our face-to-face classes from grades 1 to 3 under 20. That's our full expectation that we will be able to do that. The maximum class size by law in Ontario for kindergartens is actually 29, with an average of 26, with 2 educators in that classroom. However, when we fully utilize all of the means available to us, we believe that we will be able to bring that number down to 22 or less for our in-class kindergartens. Again, with 2 educators present there, that will allow them to perhaps move kids into different spaces and so on, and spread them out even further. And lastly, for our grade 4 to 8s, we look at an average class size across the system of 24.5, which means that there's actually no legislated or no required cap on the size that that kids in those grades can go, but it is an average class size across the system. So some of you who are listening right now, I can tell you myself, I on occasion taught classes of 32. Sometimes we had classes that were small. When you're dealing with averages, where you have a small class in one school, you might have a larger class in another, or etc. Nonetheless, again, by utilizing all of the means available to us, we believe that we can bring all of those junior intermediate classes, except in the case of some specialized classes where there's other considerations, but we believe that we can bring them down to 25 or less. And so in terms of that social distancing, the other thing that we did during the summertime under the direction of Superintendent Grieve, we had our custodians go in and actually place out our desks and measure our desks, the distance between them. The Sick Children's document and the guidance from the ministry says that we have to have a minimum of 1 meter distance between them. And so we wanted to know how many desks would be able to be in a classroom at that spacing. So we had our custodians do some exercises for us. A lot of our classrooms in a lot of our schools are around 750 square feet, but some of them get quite a bit larger. And so depending upon the space, we identified what the maximum number of desks could be at a 1 meter distance. And then now that we know that we're going to be able to put additional staffing in the schools to be able to bring those numbers down, we anticipate a couple of things. One, those numbers will be a lot smaller than what we thought that they would be. And 2, that we would not only would we never exceed the maximum number that could be placed into a classroom at 1 meter apart, we anticipate that in almost all cases there will be less than that number, and therefore the desks will be able to be spread out more appropriately.
It
I
helps
think
if
we-
I turn my
oh, there you
microphone
go.
on. Sorry about that.
Nope.
Our following question is, the ministry has announced that school boards have access to reserve money to hire teachers. Have we hired any teachers to either teach online classes or decrease class sizes?
And so I think that I sort of addressed this in the previous question. And again, I'd like to express thanks to our Board of Trustees who have really prioritized the safety of our students by allowing us to access all the reserves that we have in order to be able to support that safe return. It's interesting that you say to be hired to teach online or to decrease that. That's actually not how we staff. So we hire a certain number of teachers in the school, and then we assign them either to online or to in school and so on. So it's not hiring them for one or the other. But yes, we will be hiring. Actually, in our board this year, we've already hired over 100 teachers. We will be staffing in a way to that will increase the number of teachers that are in schools. We will be looking to put as many of our teachers as possible into the in-class classes where we have to be mindful of physical distancing, and we'll be looking to achieve efficiencies through the online classes, not by exceeding what would otherwise be the class sizes, but by maximizing what we can do there under the regulations, etc.
Our next question is with respect to busing. Are you aware how physical distancing will be maintained on the school buses and what their cleaning and disinfecting protocols are?
I'm going to ask Superintendent Wilson, who's on the line right now, if he could respond to that question for us.
Thank you, Director Burrell. As far as the physical distancing being maintained, as our bus typically can, at full capacity, can be 72 students. We have reduced the capacity of the busing to be 48 per seat, and also each bus is to have a seating plan, and also we are using our layered approach as far as students required to wear a mask, and also help out with some assistance with cohorting, people from the same household or class cohort sitting in the same seat. As far as the busing enhancing of the cleaning, we have the buses will be wiped down as far as the high touch areas. So you would have places like the door, railings, specific places on the seats, which would be wiped down between runs. And also there will be a midday, and so typically right now there's an end of day cleaning. We are also adding a midday cleaning to bolster the cleaning of the bus too.
Thank you, Superintendent Wilson. Our next question is in regards to how will non-compliant students and parents be handled in regards to the mask wearing or social distancing within the schools?
Thank you for that question. And so I guess that I would say two things. One is we are an educational organization, and so as an educational organization, we are going to make it our business to properly educate our students, our staff, and our communities at large about the things that we are putting in place, why we are putting them in place, and how we need everyone to share in that responsibility of keeping one another safe. I think that moreover, as a Catholic learning community, Catholic, one of the primary facets of our faith is that we believe in community and we believe in looking after one another and so on. And so in terms of that question, I guess things that I would say, I have noticed myself, so over the last couple of weeks, myself and the number of members of our senior administrative team, a lot of our managers, etc., have returned to the workplace. And we are now in physical contact with each other daily in terms of working together again, not virtually. And we are practicing social distancing, and we are wearing masks, etc. We also have recognized over that time period is that occasionally, you forget. And we always remind each other right away, hey, mask or whatever, or you quickly I don't know if there's anybody out there. If you're anything like me, I can count probably the 1,000 times that I have been out of my car and halfway into the grocery store before I remembered that I forgot my mask and have to turn around and go back and get it and come back in and so on. And I've almost been in the door on occasion when I realized I didn't have it with me and had to go back. And so I guess that what I would like to say is we will handle these situations in the same way that we handle all of the situations that we have in the past with regards to student behavior, etc. We'll handle it through requests, through reminders, through education, and if necessary, remediation. And so those are the kinds of approaches that we would take.
Thanks, Director Burrell. One of the questions we received is, will the grade 7 and 8 students still receive their vaccinations at school?
And so with regards to that question, I guess the short answer is I don't know yet. Vaccinations at school are things, so when we complete vaccinations, and in some of our schools like dental health screening and all of that, those are done in conjunction with our partners from the public health department. And so we'll be taking our direction from them and working in collaboration with them to determine if that's an appropriate thing to do or if they would like to address it in a different way.
Thank you. This question is in relation to the temperature checks and symptom identification, and why has that not been made mandatory at the school, especially at the elementary level?
So in this case, I am going to quote page 8 of the document that I referred to around the COVID guidance for school reopening. On page 8, it says, on-site temperature measurement or pulse oximeter checks are not recommended because fever and hypoxia are not consistent symptoms in children and youth and would result in lines and delayed school entry and has not been shown to be an effective screening strategy to date. So I would say in short order, we very, very much will be doing everything we can in terms of public awareness, communications, etc., signs on our doors, reminding parents and students how important it is for them to monitor their own health before coming into the school, and then we, from there, if we see any signs or symptoms of illness of anyone, as I said, we will revert to that protocol that will be coming from the ministry from there.
Thank you, Director. Our next question is, will there be hand washing and/or hand sanitizer stations added to all schools? And will students be allowed to bring their own hand sanitizer with them?
Thank you, and I'm going to ask Superintendent Grieve to respond to that question.
Thank you, Director Burrell. So hand sanitizer will be provided throughout the school, and specifically in classrooms without sinks that where students could otherwise be washing their hands. Students and staff should be using the hand sanitizer that is provided, as it meets the public health standards and it is being provided through our ministries. Should there be any products or hand sanitizers brought into the school from home for personal use, it may not be allowed to be used because it could create concerns around sensitivities for other students and staff within the building. Thank you, Director.
Thank you.
Our next question is, how will taking 2 courses per quadmester on alternating days affect those in grade 12 trying to get into college or university? And will they be able to complete enough courses to provide their marks to the universities in order to see if they are accepted?
Thank you, and I'm going to ask Superintendent Wynne to speak to that.
Thank you, Director. Yeah, that's a great question. I could see that concern from a student perspective in grade 12 or as a parent wondering what does that look like. Something to keep in mind is with the return to school, that's impacting all students throughout the province of Ontario. So we haven't received any specifics yet, but we imagine at the college and university level where they're looking at their marks, they're reassessing that and what that will look like. So it wouldn't impact any particular school board. And the other thing to keep in mind as well, in terms of if they are timetabled for 6 or 7 credits this year, then they can still accomplish those, or 8 credits, so they'll have no problem fitting those in.
Thank you. Just as a clarification, so if the secretary at the secondary level, will the teachers be teaching 2 days worth of curriculum in the one day?
Again, I'm going to ask Superintendent Wynne to comment on that.
So for instance, if a student, I think on one of the slides I previously mentioned, if a student is timetabled for math, what they'll be doing is more honing in, like more in depth on the math, but they'll be doing different activities. They will be covering more, it will be more focused on that day. Because of the quadmester, it will be more condensed. But I guess the positive of that is students will only need to focus on 2 subjects versus 4 for a shorter period of time, so they can give their full attention to those 2 subjects and then pivot and then focus on another 2 versus the 4.
Thank you, Superintendent Wynne. Our next question is another high school question, which we received a number of questions around it, is when will the students be receiving their timetables?
And so I don't know if Superintendent Wynne is going to want to comment on that, but I at least will start with that to say I would ask for parents' patience with regards to that particular question at this moment. So as we said earlier tonight, we only received our approval for the model that we are enacting last week. And so to give you a sense of how this process works, under normal circumstances, we begin our timetabling and staffing. So we begin to look at our enrollments in and around February, March. We start to build our timetables in around April, May, and it usually takes us all the way through till June just to get our timetable and our staffing all kind of organized. And then even when we come back under normal circumstances in a normal September, there are conflicts and things that we have to work out often during the first week of school. With the situation that we are in right now, is we had all of that work done, and then we had 1,000 students, a little over 1,000 students who have now chosen online, which means that every one of our schools, so it's about 18% of our student population, is now moved into the online program, which means that they've moved out of our secondary schools, which now is going to force us into re-timetabling for every school. Building our matrix again for every school and trying to get that in place. And so, so at this point in time, we know that you will have your timetable before you start school, and we are aiming to try to have that during that first week of September 8th to September 12th. Superintendent Wynne, have I missed anything, or would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think that pretty much captures it, and I think from for those parents and guardians listening, if there's any students listening, if I put my principal hat on, as I used to be a former secondary principal, I know students quite often would change their minds in the summer as well, and sometimes they pick their courses back in February, so it was always an ongoing process. It was very fluid, and quite often the first week. So the positive of that is some students may have reconsidered some of their courses, and now they're looking at, here's an opportunity where they can select. But in terms of next steps, if there are any conflicts with their timetable, or if they were told that they would have certain subjects for first semester, then guidance counselors will be reaching out to them, and they'll be touching base with them prior to school.
And so right now, as recently as this afternoon, we are looking at just operationally what we reasonably believe we can complete. And when I say reasonably, I mean with us all working all hands on deck. And so one of the things that we have to accomplish is, like, we are looking at having to move approximately in secondary, like potentially up to 60 staff members from their current placement within schools to a different placement in an online school, and build a new timetable there as well. So not trying to make excuses, but I would say that we are going to have to ask for patience on that, and we certainly will be advising and connecting with families as soon as we are able to let them know what they can expect in terms of those first those quadmester assignments.
Thank you, Director Burrell and Superintendent Wynne. This next question is, will there be live instruction for online learning for both elementary and secondary?
The short answer to that is yes, there will be. And maybe I'll leave it at that short answer right now, just looking at our time, and we can go from there.
Thank you, Director Burrell. So our next question, since the majority, based on our presentation earlier, have opted for in-class learning, if a parent/guardian is not comfortable after the staggered start period and wish to switch to online learning, how quickly will this be facilitated?
Once again, I think I sort of touched on this in the presentation. We will facilitate it as quickly as we possibly can, but that also largely depends on numbers. So as we're setting up that online school, you have to think of that online school as being like a different school. So if you think state elsewhere, that is actually a different school. So it's not just as simple as, oh, you know, you're just going to jump in and you're going to see what the grade 6s are doing today, because it's not going to be a single lesson for all of the grade 6s in the online school. We're going to have over 3,000 students in elementary in that online school, and they each will have their own kind of homeroom teacher, and they each will be following their own course of study, etc. Right? So you can't assume that what's happening, first of all, in your child's in-class is going to be the same as what's happening online, any more than you could assume if you transferred your child from St. Mark's to St. Elizabeth Seton that it would be a seamless switch. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is, we of course will have to, I talked about like class size regulations and all of that kind of stuff. So when and where possible, when we have space in those classes and so on, if we can facilitate that happening quickly, we will. But if we happen to be reaching our caps and we're at a place where the only way that we would be able to do that is add another class, and that would require a restructuring and so on, that might take longer. So that's the best explanation that I can give right now.
Thank you, Director Burrell. The next question is regarding high school students and their uniforms. So I understand that high school students are expected to wear their uniforms, but we have some families who do not have multiple pieces of their uniform. Some have one pair of pants, one kilt. However, if they're wearing their expectation that does this request parents who don't have the same numbers as some of the others?
Okay, I think it was cutting out a little bit there, but I understand your question to be about uniforms and whether or not students would be required to launder their uniforms every day, and just recognizing that some of our students may not have multiple pieces to their uniform.
Exactly.
Okay, so two things that I would remind people. In terms of in-class attendance, our students are actually going to be in secondary schools are going to be attending school every other day. So they're not coming every day in a row, they're coming every other day. So that in and of itself will give them opportunity to either air out their clothes, to wash their clothes, etc., because they won't be in school every single day in a face-to-face learning environment. The second thing that I would like to remind all of our families, though, is that we are very well aware that uniforms are not necessarily cheap and so on, and every single one of our schools has programs where students can buy secondhand uniforms and additional pieces in secondhand uniforms. Our principals already asked us about that. Usually that's done face-to-face, but I know that they're looking at other ways, perhaps virtually, ordering like online at Amazon to be able to look at the pieces that they have available. If we have any students out there that are concerned and that they believe that they need some additional pieces to their uniforms but can't afford it at this time, please do contact your school. They will deal with that confidentially, and they will assist you.
Thank you, Director. Our next question is in regards to masks. Can a child wear a face shield versus a mask? And also, just in addition to that, is there medical documentation required by the board to be provided to be exempted from face masks?
Okay, so from grades 4 to 8, based on ministry direction, masks, face coverings, masks are required for children from grades 4 to 12. And so in terms of a face shield, my understanding of it is that face shields actually are effective at protecting the eyes, but not necessarily the respiratory system. And when we are speaking, to quote our Prime Minister, when we are speaking moistly, when we are speaking, and that's the way it can be transmitted. So a shield doesn't replace a mask. Those are not the same things. I do want to say a couple of things. So we're aware of some of our students with special needs. For example, we do have students and staff members in our board who are hard of hearing or deaf. And some of those students require the ability to lip read. And so masks are going to be a huge barrier to some of our students in those cases. And so we're looking at some specialized masks that have plastic cutouts that allow for the viewing of the lips and so on. So there's that piece. So we're looking at individual cases around how we might need to accommodate or modify for certain situations like that. We also recognize, as does the province, that there are some individuals where, because of a pre-existing condition, a mask is not a healthy option for them, and that they do require a medical exemption. And so we would probably treat that in the same way as we treat other prevalent medical conditions in our schools. So we do have a policy on prevalent medical conditions that requires meeting and consultation with the school, and the presentation of medical documentation, etc. And then the other piece that I would like to remind people is, again, I can't say it enough, but masks and shields are there to protect us when physical distancing cannot be maintained. And so in those cases, and I think that they probably will be limited, but they will exist. Of course, we would then pay extra special attention to that physical distancing piece in order to be able to protect all of our community.
Thank you. Our next question was minimal teaching in this past for a whole multitude of reasons, we understand. Will the focus in September then be to getting our kids back up to speed and to where they should be in their grade levels?
Thank you very much for that question. I'm going to ask Superintendent O'Reilly to speak to that.
Thank you, Director. Certainly, that is what our core business is, the teaching and learning for students. We recognize, given the extraordinary kind of times we have lived through, that our first and foremost will be the well-being of our students, that we will have to recognize the trauma that some students have experienced, think about their emotions. We need to create a community where they feel that they are safe, that they belong, and that they're cared for, and that this really is a time for empathy. Having said that, also we know that we're putting in, the director has explained so many different safety and operational pieces that are put into place, but that is all in service of the learning. That is where we want to focus our time, and as always is the case in September, our fabulous teachers spend their time assessing students' learning, where they're at in their learning. They also assess their social and emotional needs, but particularly they will be looking, assessing their learning needs. They will be looking from a place of asset. What do our students have in place? We will be identifying gaps. We will plan for learning opportunities to address those gaps. We will include student voice and choice in those pieces, but we will focus on developing all competencies and addressing the gaps and making sure that students feel safe and cared for. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent O'Reilly. Our next question revolves again around high school. So according to our secondary model example, the students are doing one course for 150 minutes and then transitioning to online. Is there a reason why they didn't do course 1, for example, for 75 minutes and course 2 then for 75 minutes before transitioning to online?
Yes, thank you for that question. And in fact, that was something that we did explore in one of our models, and that was denied by the ministry. They would not allow us to do that for very good reason. Earlier in the presentation, I talked about the 100 contacts limit per secondary student. And so those contacts are based on direct and indirect contacts. So the way a secondary school timetable is developed, you are in one class, for example, with your 15 groups of kids. And while you're there, say you're in grade 9, all the other grade 9s are in a whole bunch of other classes with a different cohort of kids at that same period. Following me so far? So everybody's in their classes. If we then take all of those kids, so all those kids are in their first period classes, some are in English, some are in math, some are in science, some are in whatever their first period class is, and then we have a break and move them into their second period, those classes now are all mixing. So it's not just about the mixing in the hallway, because we could potentially control that. It's about the fact that then when now they go into their new class, they could have one child from another class, 2 children from another class, 3 children. So now there's a whole new group of 15 people that are all together. And every one of those 15 people has potentially 15 other contacts that they were in with before. And so essentially it becomes a matrix that well exceeds the 100 contact limit for us. Although it, certainly we were trying to maintain like regular face-to-face contact with all of our teachers. In fact, we were basically told that no, we can't do that. We have to, first of all, limit the face-to-face contact for one course 1 week, one course the next week, and then that allows us to do proper cleaning in between. And should anybody come down with symptoms, it also allows us as clean a list of contacts as possible to be able to quickly communicate to the public health department.
Okay, thank you, Director. The next question is with respect to IEPs and how they will be handled for students who are opting for the online portion at elementary and the online portion for the secondary.
Perhaps I could just speak to IEPs in general, or maybe I'll ask Superintendent O'Reilly. Did you want to speak to that?
Sure. IEPs are something that we consider extremely important and we really value, and so we will continue to ensure that they are developed and maintained for all students, whether they attend the virtual school or the face-to-face school. Again, we will include parent input. Those IEPs will identify specific learning expectations, accommodations, and modifications needed. Student strengths and challenges will be noted. So those documents are really important, and they will continue to be important. They are legislated pieces that we do, and they will be continued, as well as the processes around them. So program support teachers will be appointed to the virtual school in the same way that they are at the schools that your children would be attending now. Team meetings and those sorts of things will occur around students, who require IEPs. So very much so, the answer is a very strong yes, that those pieces will be in place in the same way.
Thank you, Superintendent O'Reilly. Our next question is in regards to what supports will be available for students who may feel anxious/worried about the new procedures and protocols, and are there mental health supports available?
So the answer to the second part of that question is yes, there will be mental health supports available through your school and through our student services department and our regular processes. But I'd also like to tell you that today and tomorrow, we are meeting with all of our principals, and one of the big pieces of learning that we're doing and resources that we're sharing is all about mental health resources that will be available to our staff as they welcome our students back in. So we have a countless number of resources developed under our mental health lead, Diane Mullane, and our student services department that will support instruction on a base level as we move forward. But specifically for kids who are really struggling, I would say that that was actually one of the big impetus, or one of the big factors in the decision-making process around the staggered entry. And so when we look at staggering entry, I promise you we're not just trying to make things more difficult for parents. We are actually trying to think about how we can bring children in as safe a way as possible. And so we really believe strongly that bringing kids in very small cohorts at the beginning and giving lots of opportunity for direct connection between the teacher or the educator and those kids, and working them through those in a very personalized way will help the teachers to really be able to observe the kids, see the kids that are the most nervous or anxious, set them at ease, and so on. So you can only imagine, even in a small class, if we talk about a class of 20, even a small class of 20 kids, if all of those kids arrive on the first day and the teacher's trying to teach them all, it's going to be harder to make that individual kind of observations and connections. Whereas if you take that class and you bring in 5 children every day for the first week and you get to work with them individually and really show them around, they're going to get a lot more personal attention. And over that 2-week period, as we build from a quarter of the class to a half a class, the whole class, we really think that that's going to help to, it's almost like a work hardening kind of thing. It's going to help to ease them back to school, support them, answer all of their questions, so that by the time that the whole class is there, hopefully all of our kids are going to be transitioned well.
Thank you, Director. We're now going to switch veins and start and ask about custodians again. How are the custodians being trained to do the deep cleaning that needs to be done, and when during the week is this to take place, and what exactly is involved in a deep cleaning?
Thank you for that, and I'm going to ask Superintendent Grieve to speak to that.
Thank you, Director Burrell. Thank you for the question. Our custodians have actually had deep cleaning and disinfectant training in the past. It's been used at times when public health has identified some maybe a virus outbreak at a school or a community. But our custodial staff will be receiving refresher training next week. This will include on the various products that we're using, the frequency, the touch points, and other areas of focus for this September. In terms of the deep cleaning, sort of the definition or description, basically what they're doing is that they're using a soap and water solution to clean the surface, so to remove any built-up debris or obvious dirt. That's followed by using the approved disinfectant with basically the time that it has to stay on the surface, and then wiping that off. This will be done for the high touch points in the classrooms and throughout the school, so desks, light switches, faucets, countertops. We've got a list of them that the custodians will be following through on. And that covers our deep cleaning, and that will our evening custodians will be doing that on a nightly basis in terms of wiping all those surfaces and disinfecting them. So that gives you an understanding of the frequencies. Thank you, Director.
Thank you. We are at our last question. This question is with respect to when a student transitions from the online to the in-class, if they've chosen the online at the beginning, will they be placed at their home school when they are allowed to return to the in-person learning? And if not, why not?
Thank you for that question. Actually, when I saw that question earlier, I interpreted it differently. So 2 things. Actually, I'm just going to say yes, they would be returned to their home school at the end of the day. What I would like to re-emphasize, though, is that, again, just as we said earlier, that might take some time, and people might have to wait till a natural break in the school year for us to make that happen. But yes, we would be returning them back to their home school. And today, just if any of you have ever heard of the person, Brené Brown, she's a researcher, sociologist, really brilliant person in the United States, done a lot of TED Talks on vulnerability and so on. And she talked about the whole notion of things, this being the first time for all of us. None of us have been through a pandemic before. We're trying to work our way through this. And so we have to be kind and patient with one another. But one of the things that she recommended is to always to check our expectations, because we've never done this before. So we're all trying our best to do what's right, but also to put things in perspective. And part of that perspective is, whether we believe it or not, at some point in time, this too will pass, and we will get back to some other form of normal. Perhaps we will learn good things through all of this that we will carry forward with us, but we are not going to be in this state forever. And so, going back to that whole notion, of course, we want to return kids to their home schools. We understand why some people would like to have the online option at this time, but our ultimate goal is to bring all of our communities back to where they belong, in a way that is safe and healthy for everyone.
Thank you, Director Burrell. Yes, Brené Brown is fabulous, and if you have time to check out her Netflix stand-up piece she did, phenomenal. She puts tons of things in perspective. So just in closing, I just want to thank everyone for joining us online tonight, especially to our senior admin team, our Director of Education, and for helping facilitate these questions and answers and presenting the model that we will be returning to. We hope this evening has helped ease some of your concerns regarding the return to school. We thank you all for your patience during this truly unprecedented times. I know we will probably have more questions over time as things change and we transition back into school or virtual learning. We hope to work with the director and the senior admin team to continue to provide more sessions for families in the future. But in the meantime, please don't hesitate to visit the website www.dcdsb.ca/return to learning webpage to view tonight's recording, because we will put it up for you guys to reference and listen to again, and for updates and frequently asked questions. Thank you, everyone, and I hope everyone has a fabulous evening.